Shabbat Shalom. Many years ago, before I became a rabbi, and I was in Jerusalem for a year. I was studying at the Pardes Institute of Jewish Learning. And we were studying in one of the classes, in-depth look into the Tanakh, the Bible, going chapter to chapter, book to book, and really reading through all of it. And I remember being struck as I was going through it, as I have been since, and I had to some degree before. As you look through the history of the Jewish people, the Book of Kings, and 1 and 2, and all of everything they went through, the difficulties and challenges, and everything that I knew about the temple and how our tradition understands the temple as a symbol of the fact that the people were united and that God was sending God's beneficence to us and protection and the Shekhinah and the spiritual splendor of the temple and all those things. Like, how could the temple exist at the same time as all this stuff happening in our history, as all the deep spiritual corruption, the degeneration in the temple, the wars between different Jewish groups, the turmoil, the ethical corruption, the moral corruption, the turmoil. And that the prophets kept thundering throughout all this period, if you don't stop acting in this way, it's not going to end well. There's going to be a loss of God's grace and care. This is the breaking of the covenant if the corruption continues. And yet, nothing was happening. The temple was still standing. And the people also felt this way. They knew that the temple was also the symbol of the relationship, as we read in our parsha, make me a sanctuary so that I may dwell amongst you. It was a place for God's presence, symbolic of how God felt about the Jewish people at that moment. Right? There was even, as mentioned, the cherubs on top of the ark would embrace each other when everything was going well, and when they weren't, they would look the other way. And you read the Tanakh, and there are very few periods where it seems like everything is in alignment. Even when some is in alignment, most of it is degeneration, embraced by the people, the idolatries that filled the temple and the weak rulers who encouraged all of it. But what they thought is that God is going to continue to protect the temple and protect the people and protect Israel, maintain the relationship, despite all of these messages of doom and gloom. And we even believe that the prophecy itself, that only was possible to hear God's words because of the temple and of God's presence in the temple. And the people believed it. And it may have been true until Jeremiah came. And Jeremiah's words were that all this time, when you didn't do anything about it, God was slowly losing his trust in you. And then it was too late. And Jeremiah said, you think God will always protect his temple? He's already decreed it will be destroyed. And they all believed he was just a madman and full of woe, hyperbole. God would never leave his house or destroy Jerusalem. They had witnessed so many miracles of saving it, despite the warnings. And the truth is that God had protected it, but after hundreds and hundreds of years of warnings, God no longer did. And finally, Jerusalem and the temple destroyed. And they saw that Jeremiah had been a true prophet, and all the others had been true prophets, but it was too late. And it was the same with the second temple. The warnings from the prophets no longer came, but the corruption was obvious. The people were burning each other's stores of food, hating each other, and after it was destroyed, nothing could bring it back. The rabbis tried everything they could, And there was a moment where a Roman emperor may, according to legend, have allowed it to happen, but it was not allowed to happen. And it was 2,000 years until the Jews were able to have sovereignty again in the Holy Land. This is why so many of us now are very worried about what's happening in Israel. After 2,000 years, our return really, truly was miraculous. Coming after the Shoah, a new Israel, a new identity, a new flag. It really was, as the Psalms say, we were as dreamers. It was something beyond our wildest expectations and dreams, nearly perfect, witnessing miracles almost as true and in our world as the parting of the sea. Most of the Jewish world saying, "Bless the state of Israel," the beginning of the flowering of the redemption. And even now, there are those who say, "Do not worry, the miracles will continue, it's all going to be okay." And all these problems that have festered for so many years, nothing to worry about. The power of the ultra-Orthodox, the violent extremism in the West Bank and Yehuda and Shomron, how Israeli Arabs are treated, the hate of people who think differently. And so in the Israeli media, there's been a lot of talk about the 8th decade, and what they're calling the curse of the 8th decade. And that when one studies our 4,000-year-old history, the 8th decade is when Jewish sovereignty over and over has been lost because of infighting and division and loss of values. Right? It's in the 8th, we read this morning about the building of the temple, which was the culmination of King David uniting the kingdoms, all the tribes. Well, in the 8th decade after King David did so, Solomon's children divided the kingdom into two, and it was all downhill from there. And the Hashmonite and the Maccabees, also in the 8th decade, it all started to fall apart, and soon the Romans took over. And we're seeing the same hatred, the same extremism and corruption. And yet we also have to have faith. And that here too, along with a moment of fear, is a moment of opportunity to deal with these issues and reclaim the Israel that we believe in and take it back. And to hold on to the fact that Israel is usually at its best when it's the worst, when everything is at its most difficult. And then it's forced to find its core values and return to that vision. And so in our Parsha, God commands the people, "Build me a sanctuary so that I may dwell amongst you," the united people. And he says, "Tell the Israelite people to bring me gifts, and you shall accept gifts for me from every person whose heart is so moved," whose heart is so moved. And the Hebrew is just beautiful for this sentence, "Benidivat lev," whose heart is so moved, but really also with a gracious heart. What God wanted was the gift of everyone's gracious hearts. And that his temple, holding God's beneficence, the symbol of our unity, could only be built with gracious hearts. And God could make us all accept the law with a mountain turned upside down over our heads, as the Midrash says. But the temple, a house for God, could only be built with a gracious heart. 10 days ago, my father was in Jerusalem at one of the biggest demonstrations so far, just next to the Knesset. There were 100,000. Some people say there were 300,000. And he remarked to me what others have said. This was a demonstration of Sabaim, of grandparents. And others who usually do not go out to demonstrate, but everyone was looking out for each other and helping each other. And it was positive and not negative. People believing in the vision of Israel that they felt was in danger. And there were some whistles and songs and speeches. But above all, there were many flags. In fact, there were a sea of flags. Many spoke about it also. There was a reclaiming of the flag and of saying, we love our country. And maybe for some it'd been a while since they truly thought it and expressed it, that love for the country. But they were going to do everything in their power to reclaim and to rebuild the Israel that they believed in. Just a tremendous sense of love of Israel, but just a fragile beginning to all the work that needs to be done. And it's really not so different in the rest of the world, and everything the rest of the world is going through too. Ukraine, and the whole world in its 8th decade since we almost annihilated each other. And this day of hate today, just another symptom of what is happening. We do not know the way ahead, but it's only with love of Israel and love of humanity and the gracious hearts that we can hope to find a new vision and a way to build a new tabernacle for our people and for the whole world. And not to be just another iteration of a failed Jewish state in its 8th decade, thinking God and the miracles and will just continue and never leave us. But refining the broad and open and spiritual and inspiring vision which can carry not just Israel, but all of the Jewish people, including all of us here in America, the whole world, into the decades and centuries ahead. And in the hope and in the prayer, there will truly be the flowering of our redemption. Shabbat Shalom.